A Hollywood star fell in love with me, and I don't know what to do. Prologue. I had always imagined Hollywood would feel different, the kind of place where dreams came alive just by breathing the air. I thought the streets would sparkle, the people would smile more, and everything would just fall into place. But as I stood there, luggage in hand, staring at the big sign on the hill, I realized that my dreams would have to be fought for, every inch of them. Mexico City seemed so far away now, a world apart. My parents had practically begged me to stay, to settle down and marry Ruben, the son of a businessman my father approved of. He had a stable job, a predictable life laid out for him. But I didn't want predictable. I wanted adventure. I wanted more. I could still hear my mother's voice echoing in my mind. Bella, Hisha, there are many women here who like Ruben. Aren't you afraid of losing him? Get married, this pursue your dreams. Nonsense is over. I shook my head to push the memory away. Hollywood was my shot at making something of myself, not just for me, but for every girl back home who was told to play it safe. As I checked into my small apartment, the realization sank in. I was a nobody here, just another girl hoping to get discovered. I had no connections, no family to turn to, and all I had was the little bit of money I'd saved. But I had something more important: determination. The casting call came 3 days after I landed, a small part in a big movie, but I didn't care. I needed the work, and this was my foot in the door. Dream big, Bella, I told myself as I stood in line at the casting office, rehearsing my lines over and over again in my head. Inside the casting room, I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of 1,000 unspoken hopes. A casting director flipped through headshots without even looking up, a bored expression on her face. Next, she barked, and that was my cue. I stepped forward, heart racing, but I wasn't going to let nerves get the better of me. Not today. I gave it everything I had, pouring my soul into those few lines. After I finished, she barely glanced at me. "You'll hear from us if we're interested," she said flatly. My stomach sank, but I thanked her and walked out. I had learned early that this industry didn't give away compliments easily. As I exited the studio, my eyes caught sight of someone across the lot. Eduardo Rodriguez. Even if you weren't into movies, you knew who he was. He was the Eduardo Rodriguez, handsome, charming, and practically every woman's fantasy. And of course, he had a reputation to match. A group of young women near me giggled as he passed by, swooning over his every step. I shook my head. "Another womanizer," I muttered under my breath. Men like him were always the same, thinking the world revolved around them. I'd seen enough of it back home, with all the local rich boys who thought a pretty smile could get them anything. No thanks. Suddenly, Eduardo's eyes met mine. He looked curious, almost amused, like he could sense my lack of interest in him. I looked away quickly and kept walking. Later that night, I found myself at a small diner, trying to save every penny I had. The waitress was kind enough to keep refilling my coffee, even though I hadn't ordered much. I stared at my reflection in the window, my mind racing. What now? I whispered to myself. The reality of how tough this was going to be was sinking in. The competition, the endless auditions, the rejection. It was overwhelming. But as I sat there, I remembered why I was doing this. It wasn't just about me. It was about showing everyone, my parents, the whole world, that I could make it on my own terms. My phone buzzed. It was Carla, my best friend from back home, the only person who believed in me just as much as I believed in myself. "Hi, Bella?" she asked, her voice always full of warmth. "Any luck yet?" I sighed, playing with the edge of my cup. "I auditioned today, but I don't know. They didn't seem interested." "Don't get discouraged. You'll make it, Bella. You're too fierce to give up." I smiled at her words. "You're right. I didn't come all the way here just to turn around and marry some guy for the sake of convenience. I'm not giving up that easily." Just as I ended the call and was about to head home, a sleek black car pulled up outside the diner. And who stepped out but Eduardo Rodriguez himself? I couldn't believe it. Of all places he had to show up here. He walked in like he owned the place, the air around him shifting as every head turned. I tried to shrink into my booth, hoping he wouldn't notice me, but it was too late. He spotted me almost immediately. With a sly smile, he walked over to my table, his presence completely overwhelming the small space. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. I glanced around, half expecting him to be with someone else. But no, he was alone. Sure? I said hesitantly, though everything in me screamed to tell him no. He slid into the booth across from me, his eyes twinkling with amusement. You're new in town, aren't you? How can you tell? I replied, trying to sound as unimpressed as possible. Just a hunch, he shrugged. Plus, I haven't seen you around before. And I make it a point to know everyone worth knowing. Maybe I'm not worth knowing, I shot back. He chuckled softly. Somehow, I doubt that. I stared at him for a moment, trying to figure out what game he was playing. Men like him didn't talk to women like me unless they wanted something. And I wasn't about to let myself become another name on his list. Look, I said, leaning forward. I know your type, Eduardo, and I'm not interested. His eyebrows raised slightly, clearly not used to hearing that. My type? What exactly is that? Charming, handsome, and very used to getting what you want. He smirked, folding his arms. Well, you're half right. I rolled my eyes. And which half is that? I am handsome, he said with a wink. I laughed despite myself. Maybe he wasn't so bad, but still, I wasn't going to let my guard down. I'm not looking for anything, I said more seriously. I came here to work, not to get caught up in distractions. Eduardo nodded, the teasing look fading from his face. Fair enough, but you should know Hollywood's all about distractions. Not for me, I said firmly. We'll see about that, he said, standing up to leave. Good luck, Bella. Something tells me you're going to need it. As he walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what exactly he meant. But one thing was clear. My life in Hollywood had just gotten a lot more complicated. Chapter 1. The weeks after our first encounter with Eduardo were a blur of auditions, rejections, and long hours at the diner where I'd become a regular. The hustle was tougher than I thought, but I wasn't going to let the grind break me. The city was relentless, but so was I. One night, after a particularly disappointing audition, I ended up at an industry event, a networking mixer for new talent. I wasn't really in the mood to socialize, but Carla had convinced me to go. It's Hollywood, Bella, she'd said over the phone. You have to put yourself out there. The moment I stepped inside the swanky venue, I felt out of place. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter, filled with people in glamorous outfits, mingling as if they'd known each other their entire lives. I smoothed my dress, a simple black number I'd picked up from a thrift shop, and made my way to the bar. I ordered a drink, trying to blend in. My eyes scanned the crowd, hoping to spot someone, anyone, who didn't look like they were born into this world of glitz and glamour. And then I saw him. Eduardo. Of course, he'd be here. I turned back to my drink, hoping to avoid his gaze, but it was too late. The moment our eyes met, I knew he wasn't going to let me slip away unnoticed. Fancy seeing you here, his voice said smoothly from behind me, his presence too close for comfort. I turned to face him, keeping my expression neutral. Isn't this your playground? He smiled, that same infuriatingly charming grin I'd seen before. It's part of the job. What about you? I thought you weren't into distractions. I'm not, I replied, keeping my tone cool. I'm here for work, networking, the usual. He raised an eyebrow. Networking. Is that what they're calling it now? I shot him a look, refusing to engage with his teasing. What do you want, Eduardo? She shrugged, looking around the room before focusing back on me. I was curious. You seemed different the other night. Most people don't turn down a chance to talk to me, I rolled my eyes. Maybe that's the problem. He laughed, a deep, rich sound that caught the attention of a few women nearby. I could feel their eyes on us, and it made me uneasy. I didn't want to be another one of Eduardo's public conquests, the next girl who fell for his lines. You're not gonna let up, are you? I asked, trying to remain calm. Nope, he said simply. You intrigue me, Bella. Most people in this town, let's just say, they don't know how to play hard to get. I'm not playing any games, Eduardo, I shot back, my patience thinning. I'm here to work, not flirt with some playboy actor who thinks he's God's gift to women. He smirked, leaning against the bar. You don't pull any punches, do you? I don't have time to waste, I replied firmly. There was a pause as he watched me, his eyes searching mine. It wasn't the usual cocky look I'd seen before. This time there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. Look, he said, his tone softening. I get it. You're not interested in all this Hollywood nonsense. But just because I have a reputation doesn't mean you know me. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Really? Because from what I hear, I know more than enough. Eduardo sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, well, people talk. They always do. But you might be surprised if you actually got to know me. I stared at him, trying to figure out if this was just another line, another attempt to get me on his list. But there was something in the way he looked at me. Something that made me pause. I'm not like the others, Eduardo, I said, my voice steady. I won't be another one of your flings. He held up his hands in mock surrender. Who said anything about flings? I'm just asking for a conversation. Maybe a coffee. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. You really don't give up, do you? Not when I know what I want, he replied, a playful glint in his eyes. Before I could respond, someone called his name from across the room. Eduardo glanced over, nodding in acknowledgement before turning back to me. I've got to go. But think about it, Bella. I'm not the bad guy everyone says I am. With that, he flashed me a grin and walked away, leaving me standing there, confused and annoyed. It wasn't the last time we crossed paths, of course. Over the next few weeks, Eduardo seemed to pop up everywhere. At auditions, at parties, at events I didn't even think he'd be interested in. And every time he'd find me, flash that same disarming smile and strike up a conversation. At first, I brushed him off, giving him short, polite responses before making a quick exit. But the more I saw him, the harder it became to ignore the tension between us, the kind that made my heart race whenever he was near, even when I didn't want it to. One night, after a particularly long day of auditions, I found myself at another industry mixer, exhausted and ready to leave. As I was grabbing my coat, there he was again, leaning against the door with that familiar look in his eyes. Leaving so soon? He asked. I sighed, tired of the back and forth. Eduardo, what do you want from me? He looked at me for a long moment before answering, his voice unusually serious. I want to get to know you, Bella. The real you, not just some actress trying to make it, the woman behind all the ambition. I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to walk away, to keep him at arm's length, but another part, the part I'd been trying to suppress, was curious. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't what I thought he was. Maybe there was more to Eduardo Rodriguez than the charming playboy I'd pegged him as. But I wasn't ready to find out. Not yet. I'm not interested in your games, Eduardo, I said quietly, walking past him. He didn't follow me, but as I left the venue, I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. Something told me this wasn't the end of our story. Not by a long shot. Chapter 2. I wasn't sure when things started to change. It was gradual, like the way the sun sets. At first, you don't notice, but then suddenly, the whole sky is a different color. Eduardo kept showing up as persistent as ever. But something shifted. It wasn't just the flirtatious banter anymore. There were moments, small ones, where he let his guard down, and I started seeing pieces of him I hadn't expected. One afternoon, after an exhausting audition that went nowhere, I found myself sitting alone in the corner of a cafe, flipping through my script. It had been one of those days where everything felt like an uphill battle. The doubts crept in, and I wondered if this dream was worth all the rejection. Suddenly, I heard that familiar voice, one that by now I could recognize anywhere. Mind if I join you? Eduardo asked, sliding into the chair across from me before I had a chance to answer. I sighed but didn't tell him to leave. Part of me was too tired to fight him off, and another part was curious to see what he'd do next. Rough day? He asked, nodding toward the script I had abandoned on the table. I glanced at him, then back down at the pages, unsure of how much I wanted to share. Something like that. I muttered, folding the script closed. He didn't push, which surprised me. Instead, he just sat there quietly, sipping his coffee, as if he were content just being in my presence. For a few minutes, we sat in comfortable silence. I stole a glance at him, expecting his usual confident grin, but instead, he seemed thoughtful. The Eduardo I was used to, the one who always had a smart comment or smooth line, was nowhere to be found. You know, he said after a while, I get it. The grind, the endless auditions, the rejection, it doesn't go away, even when you've made it. I blinked at him, caught off guard by the seriousness in his tone. This wasn't the Eduardo I knew. Easy for you to say, I replied, keeping my voice light. You're already a star. The rest of us are just trying to keep our heads above water. He chuckled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's the thing, Bella. Even when you're at the top, it can feel like you're drowning. I didn't know what to say to that. The vulnerability in his words threw me off. For the first time, I wondered if there was more to Eduardo than the flashy persona he showed the world. Maybe, beneath all the charm, he was just as lost as the rest of us. Before I could respond, he leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You know why I keep coming around you?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I raised an eyebrow, feeling my guard go up again. "Because you don't like taking no for an answer?" He laughed, but this time it was genuine, not the practiced one I'd heard 1,000 times. "Okay, maybe that's part of it, but really it's because you're real, Bella. Everyone else in this town," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "They're all playing a role, trying to be what people want them to be. But you don't do that. You're just you." I stared at him, unsure of how to process what he was saying. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It is," he said seriously. "It's rare." I didn't know why, but his words made me feel something stir inside, a warmth I hadn't expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he stood up abruptly. "Listen, I've got to get to a meeting," he said, pulling on his jacket. "But think about what I said. Maybe I'm not such a bad guy after all." He gave me a small, genuine smile, nothing like the smirks I'd grown accustomed to, and left without waiting for a response. I watched him go, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't ready to answer. After that day, Eduardo and I seemed to cross paths more often than ever before. At first, it was coincidental, random run-ins at events or auditions, but soon it became intentional. He'd call or text, always with some casual excuse to meet up. "I'm not interested in being another one of your conquests, Eduardo," I had warned him more than once. "I know," he'd say simply, not pressing me, but never backing down either. "That's not what this is." And the more time we spent together, the more I started to believe him. There was something different about the way he acted around me. He was more open, more honest than I ever would have expected from a guy like him. And against my better judgment, I started to let my guard down. One evening, after a long day of shooting, he invited me to join him for a quiet dinner at his place. I hesitated at first. It seemed too personal, too intimate. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. When I arrived at his house, I expected a glamorous Hollywood mansion, something cold and impersonal. Instead, I found a warm, inviting space filled with personal touches, a collection of old records, family photos, and books that lined the walls. It was nothing like the Eduardo I thought I knew. We spent the evening talking, really talking. Not the usual surface-level banter, but deep, meaningful conversation about our lives, our dreams, and our struggles. For the first time, I saw Eduardo as more than just a star. I saw the man behind the image, and he was far more complex than I'd ever imagined. At one point, as the night grew late, he turned to me, his expression serious. "You know, Bella," he said quietly, "you've made me think about things in a way I haven't in a long time. About what I really want in life." I felt a lump form in my throat, unsure of how to respond. There was something so raw, so honest in his words that it scared me. "I don't know what this is between us," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I know it's real." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. I wanted to deny it, to tell him this was just a fling, a passing attraction, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple anymore. I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. But Eduardo Rodriguez was starting to break through my defenses, and that terrified me. "We can't do this," I said, my voice shaky. "You're you. And You're not just anything," he cut me off gently. "You're the most real person I've met in a long time, Bella, and that's why this feels different." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotions. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us thick and undeniable. I didn't know where this was going. I didn't know if I could trust him or if this would just end in heartbreak. But one thing was certain, I couldn't ignore the connection growing between us. And that scared me more than anything else. Chapter 3. Dating a Hollywood star. What was I thinking? That thought hit me like a cold slap every time I saw my name in some tabloid headline. And it wasn't just the gossip, it was the looks, the whispers, the constant feeling that I was being watched, judged, compared. Eduardo had warned me about this. how fame came with baggage, how the cameras never stopped flashing. But no warning could have prepared me for the reality of it. One morning I walked into a coffee shop, phone buzzing relentlessly with notifications. I tried to ignore them, but curiosity got the best of me. I opened one article, my stomach turning as I read the headline. Eduardo Rodriguez's newest flame. Is she just another fling? I scrolled through the comments. Big mistake. She's pretty, but she'll be gone in a month like the rest of them. Eduardo's just playing around. Poor girl doesn't stand a chance. I felt sick. No matter how confident I tried to be, the doubts always managed to creep in. Eduardo's past with women was no secret. He was notorious for his flings, for dating beautiful women and moving on as quickly as he started. I had told myself from the beginning that I wouldn't be another one of his conquests. But what if that's all I was? Just as I was about to put my phone away, Eduardo called. I hesitated for a second, still raw from the comments I'd just read, but I picked up. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice light. You all right? He asked, his voice full of concern. He could always sense when something was off. I hesitated, not sure if I wanted to bring it up. It's nothing, I finally said, just the usual. There was a pause on the other end, and I knew he understood. The tabloids again, huh? He asked quietly. I didn't say anything, just sighed, the weight of it all pressing down on me. It's hard, Eduardo, I admitted. Everywhere I go, people are watching, judging, waiting for me to mess up. And then there's your history. There it was, the thing we had been avoiding, the elephant in the room. His past. Bella, he said, his voice steady, I know it's not easy. But I promise you, this is different. You're different. They don't know us. They don't know what we have. But how can I trust that? I blurted out, unable to hold back anymore. You've said those things before, to other women. How am I supposed to believe that this time it's real? The silence on the other end was deafening. For a moment, I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke, his voice softer than before. I can't change the past, he said, and there was a sadness in his tone that made my heart ache. But I've never felt this way before, not with anyone. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the insecurities I had buried deep inside kept rising to the surface. I wasn't just fighting the tabloids or his fans. I was fighting my own fear that I wasn't enough, that I would never be enough for someone like Eduardo. That evening, Eduardo picked me up for dinner, but the tension between us was thick. As we drove through the busy streets, the silence in the car grew uncomfortable. I could tell he was waiting for me to say something, but I wasn't sure where to start. When we arrived at the restaurant, the paparazzi were already there, snapping photos as soon as we stepped out of the car. Eduardo took my hand, but I stiffened, the flashing lights making me feel exposed and vulnerable. Inside the restaurant, we were seated at a quiet corner table, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. But the conversation felt forced, both of us skirting around the real issue. Halfway through the meal, Eduardo finally broke the silence. I hate that this is happening, he said, his voice tense. I hate that people are making you doubt us. I looked down at my plate, not sure how to respond. It's not just them, Eduardo, I admitted. It's me. I don't know how to trust this, trust you. You've been with so many women before. How am I supposed to believe that I'm different? He reached across the table, gently taking my hand. Because you are, he said firmly, his eyes locking onto mine. Bella, I've never cared about anyone the way I care about you. Those other women, they were distractions. But you're the one I want to build something real with. I swallowed hard, feeling my heart race. Part of me wanted to believe him, but the fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I'm scared, I whispered, my voice trembling. What if this ends like all the others? Eduardo leaned closer, his expression serious. Then I'll fight for us, Bella. I won't let it end. I've made mistakes in the past, but I'm not going to let that ruin what we have. His words hung in the air between us, full of promise and hope. For the first time, I saw the depth of his sincerity. This wasn't just some game for him. He was willing to fight for me, for us. But the question was, could I do the same? As the weeks went on, we faced more challenges. Paparazzi followed us everywhere, and gossip magazines printed rumors about Eduardo's old flames resurfacing. Jealous fans left nasty comments on my social media, questioning why someone like Eduardo would ever be serious about me. I tried to brush it off, but each time a new rumor hit, it chipped away at my confidence. Eduardo noticed, of course. He always did. One evening, after another exhausting day of dealing with the relentless media, I found myself standing on his balcony, staring out at the city lights. Eduardo joined me, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Talk to me," he whispered, resting his chin on my shoulder. I sighed, leaning back into him. "I don't know how to do this, Eduardo. The pressure, the constant scrutiny, it's overwhelming." He tightened his grip on me, his voice steady. "We'll get through it, Bella, together. I know it's hard, but I'm not going anywhere." I turned to face him, searching his eyes for reassurance. "You really think we can survive all of this? The rumors, the doubts?" He cupped my face in his hands, his gaze unwavering. "I know we can. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." In that moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let go of the doubts and the fears. But deep down, I knew that trust wasn't something that came easily for me, not after everything I had been through. And loving Eduardo, with all the baggage that came with his fame, would be the biggest test of my heart yet. Chapter 4. I never imagined falling in love with a movie star would mean losing pieces of myself along the way. Every day, it felt like I was shrinking, like the constant glare of the spotlight was burning away parts of who I was before Eduardo came into my life. I should have been happy. Eduardo's career was skyrocketing, and I knew how much that meant to him. But for every red carpet premiere, every award ceremony, every photo shoot where I stood by his side, I felt a little more out of place. I hadn't signed up for this life. I hadn't realized that loving him would mean being in a relationship with the entire world watching. One morning, we sat in a cozy cafe tucked away from the main streets. Or at least, that's what we had thought. The atmosphere was perfect. Warm light filtering through the windows, the smell of fresh coffee in the air. I thought, just for a moment, we could escape the chaos of his fame. But halfway through our meal, Eduardo's phone buzzed with a new alert. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" I asked, sensing something was wrong. He showed me the screen, and there it was. A candid photo of us sitting in the cafe, plastered all over the internet. The caption, "Eduardo Rodriguez and mystery girlfriend, trouble in paradise?" My heart sank. "How do they always find us?" I muttered, frustration bubbling up. "We're just trying to have breakfast." Eduardo sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "They have eyes everywhere," he said grimly. "I'm sorry, Bella. I thought this place was low-key." I forced a smile, trying to hide the knot forming in my stomach. "It's not your fault. This is just the reality of being with you, right?" His expression softened, and he reached across the table to take my hand. "It shouldn't have to be," he murmured. "You deserve better than this circus." I squeezed his hand, but inside, I was struggling. It wasn't just about breakfast being ruined. It was about the loss of control over our lives. It was about the constant feeling of being on display, like every moment of our relationship was up for public consumption. I loved Eduardo. There was no doubt about that, but I didn't know how much longer I could live like this. As Eduardo's career soared to new heights, the pressure mounted. Invitations to glamorous events came in constantly, and with each one, I found myself dreading the attention more and more. The photographers, the reporters, the fans, they all had an opinion about us, about me. One night, after yet another premiere, we were back in his apartment. I kicked off my heels and flopped onto the couch, exhaustion weighing me down. Eduardo followed, sitting beside me and pulling me close. "You okay?" he asked, concern flickering in his eyes. I stared up at the ceiling, not sure how to put everything into words. "I'm just tired, Eduardo," I said quietly. "Tired of the cameras, tired of the headlines, tired of everyone having something to say about our lives." He frowned, his hand running through my hair. "I know it's hard, Bella, but I don't care what they say. None of that matters to me." I sat up, looking him in the eye. "But it matters to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Every time they call me a mystery girlfriend or make some snide comment about your past, it gets to me. I know I shouldn't let it, but it's hard. I'm not used to being public like this." Eduardo's expression softened and he pulled me into his arms. "I wish I could shield you from all of it," he murmured. "I hate that my fame is hurting you. But I need you to know, none of those women, none of my past, means anything compared to what I feel for you." I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I know you love me," I said quietly, "but sometimes I wonder if love is enough to survive this life." The breaking point came a few weeks later. We had attended a major awards show. Eduardo was up for Best Actor, and the media frenzy was at an all-time high. I had barely stepped out of the car when the questions started. "Isabel, how does it feel to be dating Eduardo Rodriguez? Is Eduardo serious about you, or are you just another fling? What do you think of his ex-girlfriend attending tonight?" The last question hit like a punch to the gut. I hadn't known his ex would be there. I plastered on a smile, my heart racing, but the damage was done. The rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being compared, of being watched, judged, critiqued. Even as Eduardo stood on stage, holding his award, I couldn't enjoy the moment. All I could think about was how suffocating it had all become. Later that night, back at his place, the tension between us was palpable. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, while Eduardo paced back and forth. "I don't know what else to do, Bella," he said, frustration lacing his voice. "I can't stop the media from hounding us, and I can't change who I am or what I do." I looked up at him, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm not asking you to change, Eduardo," I said softly. "I love you for who you are, but I didn't sign up for this life where I feel like I'm losing myself in your shadow." He stopped pacing, his expression pained. "You're not losing yourself, Bella. You're still the strong, independent woman I fell in love with." I shook my head, my voice breaking. "I don't feel strong anymore. I feel like I'm drowning. Every day, it's harder and harder to hold on to who I am." Eduardo crossed the room and knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Don't say that," he whispered. "We can make this work. We just have to find a way." But even as he said the words, I could feel the cracks deepening. Our love was real, but so were the challenges. The fame, the scrutiny, the constant pressure. It was all becoming too much. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that love alone would be enough to save us. As I lay in bed that night, with Eduardo asleep beside me, I couldn't stop thinking about what my life had become. I loved him, but at what cost? Was I willing to sacrifice my peace, my privacy, my sense of self for a love that came with so many strings attached? For the first time, I wasn't sure. Chapter 5. It all started with a single headline, but within hours it had spiraled into a full-blown scandal. I was scrolling through my phone in bed when the notification popped up. Eduardo Rodriguez caught in hotel room with former flame. My heart stopped. I clicked the article, my fingers trembling as I read the details. The tabloids were claiming Eduardo had been seen leaving a hotel late at night with a woman he had once been romantically linked to, Camila Vega, a stunning actress known for her wild love life. The photos were grainy, but the media didn't care. The story was everywhere, and with it came whispers of betrayal, infidelity, and lies. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I felt was the sharp sting of humiliation, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. When Eduardo walked through the door that evening, I was already sitting on the couch, my phone in hand, waiting. He smiled when he saw me, but the look on my face must have given everything away. His smile faded as he dropped his keys on the counter. "Bella, what's wrong?" I held up my phone, showing him the headline. "What is this, Eduardo?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why is the world talking about you and Camila Vega?" His brow furrowed as he walked over, taking the phone from my hand and reading the article. He let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I didn't do anything. Camila and I haven't spoken in years." "Then why are there photos of you leaving a hotel with her?" I demanded, standing up, my anger rising. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? For us?" He shook his head, his eyes pleading. "It's not what it looks like, Bella. I was at the hotel for a meeting. I didn't even know Camila was staying there." I wanted to believe him. I wanted so desperately to trust that he was telling the truth. But after everything we'd been through, the media attention, the constant pressure, I couldn't shake the doubt creeping into my mind. "This isn't just about the pictures, Eduardo," I said quietly. "It's about everything. Your past, your reputation, all the rumors I've had to deal with since we got together. And now this? How am I supposed to just ignore it?" He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "Bella, I love you. You're the only one I want to be with. These rumors, none of them matter. I swear to you, nothing happened. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I turned away, crossing my arms over my chest. I'm tired. Eduardo, I whispered. Tired of constantly feeling like I'm competing with your past. Tired of being judged, of feeling like I'm not enough. He reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice breaking. I need space. I need time to figure out if this is even what I want anymore. That night, I packed a bag and left his apartment. My heart shattered into a million pieces. As I walked down the dimly lit street, the cool night air biting at my skin, I felt a strange numbness wash over me. I had always known that loving Eduardo would be complicated, but I hadn't realized just how much it would cost me. I spent the next few weeks avoiding his calls, his texts, and his desperate attempts to explain. Part of me wanted to run back to him, to believe his words, to let myself be wrapped up in the warmth of his love again. But another part of me, the part that had been wounded by the relentless public scrutiny, the rumors, and now this scandal, knew I needed to protect myself. One afternoon, I met with my best friend Lena at a quiet cafe. She had been my rock throughout this entire ordeal, always there to listen without judgment. So, what are you going to do? She asked, sipping her coffee, her eyes full of concern. I shrugged, staring down at my untouched drink. I don't know. Part of me wants to believe him, to trust that it's all just a misunderstanding. But the other part of me, I don't know if I can take any more of this. The headlines, the gossip, the constant feeling that I'm not enough for him. Lena reached across the table and took my hand. Bella, you are more than enough. But I get it. You didn't sign up for this circus. You didn't ask for your relationship to be everyone's business. I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I just want peace, you know? I love him, but I don't know if love is enough to survive all of this. She gave me a sad smile. Sometimes, love isn't enough, and that's okay. You have to do what's best for you. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. My phone buzzed on the table, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it, just like I had been doing for the past few weeks. But something in me shifted, and I reached for it. It was a message from Eduardo. I miss you. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I love you, Bella. Always. My heart ached at the sight of his words. I missed him too. But I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the way things were before. The scandal had opened up wounds I hadn't realized were still festering, and I wasn't sure if they could ever fully heal. As I stared at the message, I realized that maybe this time it wasn't about Eduardo or the scandal, or even the public scrutiny. It was about me, about what I needed, about finding a way to protect my heart in a world that seemed determined to tear us apart. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Chapter 6, Isabel's POV. The plane touched down in Mexico City, the familiar rush of heat and humidity greeting me as I stepped out of the terminal. Everything seemed the same, the streets bustling with people, the smell of street food wafting through the air. But I was different. I felt like a stranger in my own city. It had been 3 weeks since the scandal broke, and it felt like my heart had been ripped out and left somewhere between Los Angeles and Mexico City. I still remembered the look on Eduardo's face the night he had begged me to come back to him. His voice, raw and desperate, had echoed in my mind for days after I left. But the truth was, even though I loved him, the damage had already been done. The headlines, the whispers, the judgment, it all weighed too heavily on me. I needed time to breathe, to step away from the whirlwind of it all, and that's exactly what I did. I had returned to Mexico City, to my family's home, seeking comfort in the familiar. Bella, you're home, my mother's voice called out, her face lighting up as she wrapped me in her arms. We've missed you. How are you feeling? I forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm okay, Ma. Just a little tired. My mother didn't press me further, though I could see the concern in her eyes. She led me inside, where the cool air of the living room welcomed me as I sank onto the couch. I stared blankly at the TV, where a news anchor was reporting on Eduardo's latest project. The headline flashed across the screen: Eduardo Rodriguez faces new scandal after hotel incident. I switched off the TV and leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Eduardo's POV. I couldn't sleep. It had been days since Isabel left, and the silence in my apartment was deafening. I hadn't been able to get rid of the nagging sense of loss, the haunting fear that I was about to lose her forever. The world had become a much lonelier place without her. I stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, my mind racing. Every night, I relived the last argument we'd had, how she had stormed out of my apartment, her eyes filled with hurt and anger. I couldn't blame her for feeling betrayed, though I had done nothing wrong. But the damage had been done. My past, my reputation, and the constant media scrutiny had created a wall between us that now felt impossible to scale. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was realizing that I had no idea how to fix it. I didn't know if I even could fix it. It had been easy to live in the world of glitz and glamour. Hollywood had become my second home, the flashing lights and adoration of fans fueling my ego. For years, I had surrounded myself with temporary flings and superficial relationships. But all along, deep down, I had been searching for something real.
I couldn't sleep. It had been days since Isabel left, and the silence in my apartment was deafening. I hadn't been able to get rid of the nagging sense of loss, the haunting fear that I was about to lose her forever. The world had become a much lonelier place without her. I stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, my mind racing. Every night, I relived the last argument we'd had, how she had stormed out of my apartment, her eyes filled with hurt and anger. I couldn't blame her for feeling betrayed, though I had done nothing wrong. But the damage had been done. My past, my reputation, and the constant media scrutiny had created a wall between us that now felt impossible to scale. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst part was realizing that I had no idea how to fix it. I didn't know if I even could fix it. It had been easy to live in the world of glitz and glamour. Hollywood had become my second home, the flashing lights and adoration of fans fueling my ego. For years, I had surrounded myself with temporary flings and superficial relationships, but all along, deep down, I had been searching for something real. And I had found it in Isabel. Isabel was different from anyone I had ever met. She didn't care about my fame, my wealth, or my career. She saw me for who I was, vulnerable, insecure, and longing for something more than just applause and attention. She was the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered beyond my status. And now, I had lost her. I sat down on the couch, my hands running through my hair in frustration. I knew what I had to do. I had to make a choice. For days I tried to focus on work, on the movie set, on interviews, but my mind kept drifting back to Isabel. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't find any peace. Every time I saw a headline or a social media post about the scandal, I felt like I was suffocating. I decided to take action. I couldn't just let her slip away, not without trying to fix things. I called my manager and asked him to pull some strings. I needed to go to Mexico City. I needed to find Isabel and tell her how much she meant to me.
I was sitting in the garden, sipping a cup of coffee, when I saw a familiar figure at the gate. I squinted into the afternoon sun, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Eduardo. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there he was, standing at the gate, looking lost and determined all at once. "Isabel," he said, his voice carrying over the distance. "Please, can we talk?" I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Anger, hurt, confusion. I stood up slowly, my eyes not leaving him as I walked toward the gate. "Eduardo," I began, my voice calm but distant. "What are you doing here? Why did you come?" He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched, but his eyes were soft. "I came because I can't lose you, Isabel. I can't lose the one thing in my life that's real. Everything else is just noise. My career, the fame, the rumors. It's all meaningless without you." I swallowed hard, my heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. Part of me wanted to run into his arms, to forget everything and just let us be. But another part of me was still hurting, still uncertain. "You don't get it, Eduardo," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "It's not just about the scandal. It's about everything. Your past, your reputation, the way the world sees you. I can't live in that world. I can't be part of a life where I'm always second to your career and your image." He stepped closer, his expression desperate. "Isabel, please, listen to me. I don't want that world anymore. I want you. I've realized that losing you, it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt myself soften. But then I remembered all the times I had told myself I wasn't enough, all the times I had doubted my place in his life. "I need time," I said, my voice low. "I need to figure out who I am without all of this, without you, without all the noise." As Eduardo stood there, watching me walk back into the house, I could see the pain in his eyes. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to run back to him, to throw everything away and start over. But I knew that deep down, I couldn't just pretend everything was okay. I needed time. I needed space. I needed to find my own strength before I could love him again. As the door closed behind me, I turned back for one last glance. Eduardo stood there, the weight of everything pressing down on him. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but one thing was certain: whatever happened, I had to find my own way first. Chapter 7.
I paced the floor of my hotel room, anxiety coursing through me. I could feel the weight of the decision I had made, the risks, the vulnerability, but I had to do this. I couldn't let Isabel slip away without a fight. This was my chance to show her how much she meant to me and to prove that I was willing to change. I grabbed my phone and called my manager. "Get me a venue," I said, my voice steady. "I want to do it publicly." "Are you sure about this, Eddie? You know the press will be there. And we're still dealing with the fallout from that scandal," he replied cautiously. "I don't care," I said, my resolve firm. "I need Isabel to know how I feel. I'm going to tell the world that I love her, and that I'll fight for her." The next day, the sun shone brightly over Mexico City, and I stood outside a popular public square, heart racing as I waited for the crowd to gather. I could hear the buzz of conversations, the murmur of excitement as fans and curious onlookers began to assemble, smartphones in hand. "Eduardo, what are you doing here?" one reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in my face. I took a deep breath, focusing on the crowd, but my eyes were searching for one person, Isabel. As the crowd thickened, I finally spotted her standing at the back, her arms crossed and an expression of cautious curiosity on her face. I felt my heart skip a beat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, raising my voice above the chatter. "I have something important to say." The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the cameras flashing. But all that mattered was Isabel. I know I've made mistakes, I've hurt the people I care about, and I've been foolish in my choices. But I want to stand here today and tell you all that I love Isabel Ramos. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I took a step forward, locking eyes with Isabel, who stood frozen, her expression unreadable. "Isabel, I know I've been reckless and irresponsible in my past relationships. I've been a fool chasing after temporary thrills instead of recognizing what truly matters. But you've changed everything for me. You're not just another woman in my life, you're the reason I want to be better." The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and whispers. I could see Isabel's eyes glistening, a mixture of disbelief and hope. I pressed on, my heart pounding. "I've decided to leave behind that part of my life. I promise to be faithful to you, to be the man you deserve. I want to build a life with you, free from the shadows of my past. You are the love I've been searching for, and I won't stop fighting for you." I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment. "And Camila Vega, the woman from the hotel scandal? She's not part of my life anymore. I've spoken with her, and she's cleared my name. What happened in that hotel was with someone else, someone who isn't me." The crowd gasped, and I caught a glimpse of relief on Isabel's face. "Isabel, I need you to know that you're the only one I want. I'm ready to give us a real chance. Will you take me back?"
My heart raced as I listened to Eduardo's heartfelt confession. The sincerity in his voice cut through the noise of the crowd, and I could feel the weight of my emotions surging back. I watched as he poured out his heart, vulnerability etched across his face. His admission of past mistakes and his promise to change struck a chord deep within me. The moment he mentioned Camila clearing his name, the tension in my chest loosened. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a glimpse of hope I thought I had lost. But could I really trust him again? As he stood there, vulnerable and exposed, I was reminded of the moments we shared, the laughter, the late-night talks, the way he made me feel seen. Suddenly, all the anger and hurt I had felt began to fade, replaced by the warmth of our memories. "Eduardo," I called out, my voice trembling. "You have to understand that it's not just about what you say, it's about actions too." He nodded, desperation clear in his eyes. "I know, and I'm ready to prove it to you. Just give me that chance." The crowd was silent, anticipation hanging in the air. I took a step forward, feeling my heart race with every beat. I want to believe you," I said, swallowing hard. "But it's going to take time. I need to see you follow through on this promise." His face lit up with hope. "I'll do whatever it takes, Isabel. Just say you'll try." With a shaky breath, I stepped closer to him, my heart pounding in my chest. "Okay, I'll try." The crowd erupted in cheers as I walked into his arms. The warmth of his embrace enveloped me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt whole again. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair, his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you for giving me another chance." As we stood there, the chaos of the world around us faded away. It was just us, two souls finding their way back to each other, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. Chapter 8. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, the morning sun casting a soft glow through the curtains. The world outside felt quieter, as if everything was holding its breath. I couldn't bring myself to look away from the article on my screen, an article that had finally confirmed what Eduardo had been telling me all along. The headline screamed, "Camila Vega apologizes, clears Eduardo Rodriguez of hotel scandal." It wasn't just the headline that caught my attention, though. It was the sincerity in Camila's words, the way she had taken responsibility for not clearing the air sooner. In a public statement, she had apologized to both Eduardo and me for the confusion caused by the scandal, and confirmed that it was her new boyfriend, not Eduardo, who had been involved that night in the hotel. She had also addressed the impact it had on both Eduardo's reputation and mine, acknowledging how the rumors had hurt not only their past, but also the people currently in their lives. Me, in particular. "I want to apologize to Isabel Ramos," the statement read, "for the misunderstanding that affected her relationship with Eduardo. I hope this clears up the mess and allows them both to move forward with their lives." For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The scandal that had haunted our relationship, the one that had caused so much pain, had been exposed as a lie. Eduardo wasn't the man they had painted him to be. He wasn't perfect, no one was, but he hadn't been unfaithful to me. He had been honest about his past, about the mistakes he made before we found each other. And Camila's words, those few short sentences, were the final pieces of a puzzle I had been trying to solve for weeks. I closed my eyes and sighed, letting the realization sink in. Eduardo was trying to be a better man, not for his fame, not for his reputation, but for me, for us. I scrolled through the article again, reading the lines over and over, allowing myself to believe. It wasn't just the words of an ex-girlfriend anymore. It wasn't the tabloid rumors or the lies that had plagued us. It was the truth, finally out in the open. Later that evening, Eduardo and I sat on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights flickering below. I held my phone in my hands, scrolling absent-mindedly as I avoided his gaze. I could feel him watching me, waiting for me to say something. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "So, did you see the news?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Instead, I handed him the phone, showing him the article about Camila's apology. His eyes softened as he read through it, and when he was done, he looked at me, eyes filled with a mix of hope and vulnerability. "I'm glad she cleared it up," I said softly. It means a lot to me." He smiled, his lips twitching at the corners. "I knew you'd come around, I know it took time, and I don't blame you for being hesitant." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crumble. "I wanted to believe you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I just didn't know if I could trust you again. After everything, the rumors, the scandal, it was too much to bear." He reached out, gently taking my hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring. I know it's been hard, but I need you to know that I'm done with that part of my life. I'm not going back to who I was. I want you, Isabel. Only you." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment where I had to decide if I could truly forgive him and move forward, or if I would continue living in the shadow of the past. I glanced down at our intertwined hands and then back up at him. "I'm starting to believe you," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. His eyes lit up with relief and he leaned in closer, his voice soft and earnest. "That's all I need, Isabel. Just let me show you." I felt my pulse quicken, my chest tightening with the weight of our unspoken emotions. He was here, right here in front of me, vulnerable and real, and I couldn't deny that I still loved him. "I'm not perfect," he added, his voice low and steady. "I'm still figuring things out, but I know I want you by my side. I'm ready to fight for us, if you'll let me." His words hung in the air between us, heavy and true. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace washing over me. This was the man I had fallen in love with. The man who was willing to fight for our love. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to fight for it too. I leaned in, closing the space between us, my lips meeting his in a soft, tentative kiss. It was a kiss that held the promise of forgiveness, of a new beginning, and of the hope that we could leave the past behind and build something better together. As we pulled away, I rested my forehead against his, my breath shaky but full of hope. And in that moment, everything felt like it was finally falling into place. Chapter 9. It felt like a dream come true. A new beginning, one that I had only dared to hope for, but never truly believed would come to life. Eduardo and I had come through the storm, and now, standing hand in hand, we were stronger than ever. Hollywood had always been a place of illusions and fleeting moments, where the spotlight could both make and break you in an instant. But now, as we returned to the city of stars, it wasn't the bright lights or the glamorous premieres that filled my heart with warmth. It was Eduardo's hand, firmly gripping mine, and the certainty in his eyes. I still remember the days when I doubted us, when I questioned whether we were strong enough to survive the rumors, the scrutiny, and the whispers of the world. But those doubts felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm proud of us," I murmured, as we stepped out of the car and into the world that had once felt like an enemy, but now felt like a backdrop to our story. Eduardo squeezed my hand, smiling down at me. "I'm proud of us, too." It wasn't just about the fame or the challenges of living in the public eye anymore. It was about us, two people who had found each other amidst the chaos, who had chosen to face the ups and downs together, side by side. We had come a long way since that first fateful meeting. We'd gone through moments of doubt, misunderstandings, and even heartbreak. But we had also learned to trust, to forgive, and to love deeply. And the more we grew as individuals, the more we saw how perfectly we fit together. Back in Hollywood, things had changed. The public had seen our journey, from the scandal to the reconciliation, and with Camilla's confession, the last of the doubts had been cleared. Fans had rallied behind us, and the tabloids, once eager to tear us apart, now followed our every step with a different kind of fascination. We were no longer just a celebrity romance. They saw the real us, our flaws, our strength, and the undeniable bond we shared. In the weeks that followed, we moved into a quiet, beautiful home in the hills, away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. It was a place where we could find peace, where we could rediscover each other without the constant noise of the world around us. Eduardo's career remained as successful as ever, but now he was more focused on what mattered. Our life together. And slowly I found my place in this world too. I didn't need to be in the limelight to feel fulfilled. Eduardo had never asked me to be anything I wasn't. He loved me for who I was, for my authenticity, and for the strength I brought to his life. One night we sat on the terrace, the soft glow of the city lights twinkling below us. A light breeze rustled through the trees, and the air was filled with the peaceful hum of a Hollywood evening. "What do you think, Bella?" Eduardo asked, his eyes filled with warmth as he turned toward me. "Are we ready for this? For the future?" I smiled softly, my hand resting gently on his chest. "I think we've been ready for a long time." His fingers traced the curve of my jaw, his touch light but intimate. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know we can face it together. With you, I feel like I can do anything." I met his gaze, my heart swelling with love. "We've already faced so much. I believe in us, Eduardo. I always have." He leaned in, brushing his lips against mine, slow and sweet, as if savoring the moment. And when he pulled away, his eyes sparkled with a promise. "You and me, Bella. We're unstoppable." I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek, not out of sadness, but because I finally felt like we had arrived, where we belonged. The next few months passed by in a whirlwind of new opportunities, quiet moments, and unspoken promises. Eduardo's fame no longer felt like a barrier between us. Instead, it became part of our journey, a reminder of how far we'd come and how much we had learned. We attended premieres together, hand in hand, no longer trying to hide or run from the world. We faced the flashing cameras and the inevitable gossip, with the knowledge that no matter what anyone said, we had each other. Our love was strong, and nothing could shake that foundation. We traveled, we laughed, and we made plans for a future that was finally ours to shape. And though the world continued to watch us, I knew that the greatest victory was the one we had won for ourselves. A year later, it was a beautiful afternoon, and Eduardo had just come home from a day on set. He was exhausted but smiling, his eyes filled with the same warmth I had fallen in love with all those months ago. "Hey," he said, walking toward me as I sat on the couch, a book in my hand. "How's your day been?" I set my book aside and smiled, my heart racing as I stood up. "Better now that you're home." He grinned and took a step closer, wrapping his arms around me. "You know what I've been thinking?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" He leaned in, his voice soft, "that this is it. This is our happily ever after." I laughed softly, leaning into him. "You think so?" "I know so." And as I looked into his eyes, I saw everything I had ever wanted. "I love you," I whispered, my voice filled with certainty. His lips curved into a smile, and he kissed me softly. "I love you, Bella, forever." And in that moment, I knew with all my heart that nothing could ever tear us apart. Together, we had fought for our love, and together, we had found our happily ever after. Epilogue. 20 years later. The grand ballroom was filled with the soft murmur of voices, clinking glasses, and the shimmering lights of chandeliers that cast a warm glow over the evening. The stars of Hollywood, old and new, had gathered to celebrate the achievements of one of their own. And tonight, the spotlight was on Eduardo Rodriguez, a man whose journey had been marked by fame, love, and an enduring legacy in the entertainment world. As Eduardo stood at the center of the stage, his hands gently clasped around the gleaming trophy, his eyes wandered toward the crowd. The applause that filled the room was overwhelming, but the only thing that truly caught his attention was the sight of the woman standing beside him, his wife, his partner, and the love of his life, Bella. She stood there, radiant as ever, her warm smile matching the glow of the golden trophy in his hands. After all these years, she had remained by his side through every triumph, every setback, and every moment that had shaped their shared life. Eduardo's heart swelled with pride as he glanced at their children sitting near the front row. Randy, their 18-year-old son, who had grown into a thoughtful and talented young man, and Lola, their 15-year-old daughter, whose spunky energy and wit were the light of their lives. "It's hard to believe it's been 20 years, Eduardo mused to the audience, his voice full of gratitude. "I've had the privilege of living two lives, one in the spotlight and one in the quiet comfort of my family. And I wouldn't trade a single moment of it for anything." He paused, taking a breath as he looked back at Bella, who stood beside him, her eyes shining with pride. "There is no award, no recognition, no role that could ever compare to the life we've built together. Bella, you are my rock, my heart, and the greatest blessing I've ever had." A hush fell over the crowd as he reached for her hand, gently holding it in his. "From the moment I met you, I knew my life would never be the same. Through all the highs and lows, the challenges and triumphs, you've been the constant that kept me grounded. And now, after all these years, I can honestly say that the greatest role I've ever played is being your husband and the father to our beautiful children." Bella's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she smiled up at him, her heart swelling with love. "You've always been my greatest adventure, Eduardo," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with a lifetime of emotions. As the applause rose once again, Eduardo stepped forward to accept his award, but not without one last glance at his family. He knew that this moment wasn't just about the work he had done, but about the life he had built, the love he had fought for, and the family that had stood by him through it all. This is for you, Bella. For Randy. For Lola. You are my everything." As he turned to face the crowd, the audience erupted into applause once more. But in that moment, Eduardo wasn't thinking about the accolades or the flashing cameras. He was thinking about the two people who had truly changed his life. The woman who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself, and the children who had brought him endless joy and pride. After all these years, they were still the foundation of his world, the reason he had done everything. And as the cheers echoed around him, Eduardo knew that this was the life he had always dreamed of. A life filled with love, laughter, and a bond that had only grown stronger with time. As the evening continued, Bella watched Eduardo, her heart full as she saw the way the world still adored him. But to her, the greatest achievement was not the gold in his hand, but the love they had shared, the family they had raised, and the life they had built together. "We did it," she whispered to him, her hand resting on his arm as they looked out at their children. Eduardo turned to her, a soft smile playing on his lips. "We always have, and we always will." As the night stretched on, they left the ballroom hand in hand, ready to continue writing the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. Together. The end. If you're enjoying the love stories here on True Hearts Presents, don't forget to subscribe. By subscribing, you'll never miss an update, and you'll be the first to know when we drop new romantic tales that will sweep you off your feet. Hit that notification bell too, so you'll get alerted whenever we post fresh content. Let's keep this journey of love going together. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more heartfelt stories.